Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to today's Cathedral webinar, live on September 5th, 2025. If it's your first time attending one of our webinars, Cathedral means learning in Creek, and today you will be learning about NAHASDA required policies and procedures. My name is Brianna Birch, and I am the Training and Development Coordinator here at the Native Learning Center, and we are all so honored that you all could join us today. Please follow along as I read the disclaimer aloud. This webinar provides a summary of fundamental concepts, requirements, and/or procedures within the allotted 90 minutes. The material discussed does not illustrate all possible scenarios that could be applicable. Also displayed here is our copyright infringement law. This is just a friendly reminder that the webinar presentation materials are all protected by copyright, trademark, trade secret, and other intellectual property laws. Before we do get started, I want to familiarize you with the learning platform and where things can be found. I have put the link to a PDF of today's slides in the chat. It's also in the shared notes. You can also access a copy of the slides as well as access today's webinar recording in the future by going to the courses section here on our platform. Any resource items for download are also available within the online course when you go through the course pages. Each time you are ready to join one of our webinars moving forward, you will just log into the website and click on the large green banner that will be across the top of the screen, like in this picture. And when you first join the webinar, it is going to prompt you to complete an audio test before you join. Please just select the listen only option so that we can avoid any audio feedback during the webinar. And then if you need to change the speaker that your sound is playing from, you can also select the phone icon down at the bottom of your screen, and this will bring up a list of your speaker and mic devices so that you can choose your preferred audio output. And we are so happy that you are here. So we do encourage you to participate during today's webinar. We are going to rely primarily on the public chat, and that is in the left gray hand menu panel. You can open up the public chat as well as the shared notes. If you click on the public chat, you will also see a chat open between all webinar attendees, the NLC facilitator, and your webinar instructor. Just simply click in the box that says send message to public chat, type the message that you want to send, and hit enter, or click on the blue paper airplane icon to send your message into us. Please send your comments and any questions that you have in that chat as well, and feel free to use the raise hand feature in the bottom right corner of the screen if you think we've missed something or if you have any questions along the way. Any tech support issues can also be submitted here as well, and I will do my best to support you and help you navigate through it. Oh, sorry. And also, if you click on the shared notes section, you'll find some helpful links, like a link for today's webinar feedback survey, which we do highly encourage you to complete to let us know how we're doing. You'll also see a link to the location of our Cathedral webinars archive on our YouTube channel, a link to connect with us on LinkedIn, and a link to bookmark for easy login to Cathedral Constant Learning in the future. At this time, we'd really love to get to know you all and would be honored if you let us know your name, where you're joining us from, your tribal affiliation if you have one. You may also be a tribal employee, and your work or role in Indian country that may have led you to today's webinar. One quick and final note as well is to just try to avoid clicking on the red menu panel all the way to the left of your screen. If you do end up clicking that red menu panel, it's going to take you out of the live webinar, but that's fine. If you do end up accidentally clicking this, you can just rejoin by clicking the green banner at the top of the screen again, and then it'll let you in. And that's how it looks inside of the constant learning platform. You'll see it on the left-hand side. But with that, it is my great pleasure to introduce today's webinar instructor. It is Cheryl Cosley. Cheryl, I'm going to hand it off to you now.
Thank you very, very much.
You're welcome.
It's Friday, guys. You made it. Only 4 days this week, but it seemed like a long week. So this presentation is courtesy of the Native Learning Center and the Department of Housing and Urban Development, more specifically in our case, Native American programs. So welcome and good afternoon. I just did go and smudge. So hopefully we'll have a good day and a nice, long, safe weekend. And my name is Cheryl Cosley, Anin, or Boujou is how you say hello in my language. My Anishinaabe name is Redbird Woman, and I'm Loon Clan. So I come from the place of the pike. You call that Kenoshinkoning in my language, which is the Bay Mills Indian community. And our reservation is located at the top of Michigan in the Upper Peninsula. And our waters actually border Canada. And we're Ojibwe or Chippewa, whichever you would prefer to refer to us as. And I served as Director of Housing for my tribe for over 28 years. During that time frame, I served as the chairperson for the Great Lakes Indian Housing Association. That's the 31 tribes surrounding the Great Lakes. We fall under the Chicago office of Native American programs. Wonderful bunch there. And I was also honored to serve on the board of directors for the National American Indian Housing Council. I did 16 years as secretary and vice chair, and I served 2 terms as a chairwoman. I left housing a couple of years after that and started Cheryl Cosley and Associates in March of 2019. So I've been in housing since 1990, a long, long time. I provide training and technical assistance through the lower 48 and Alaska. A lot of the students in the room, I've been around either 2-year housing authorities or, within your areas. Some of the Pueblos, Kalawasaponi's in the room, and there's a couple of different tribes that I've worked with, and it's good to see faces and names that I know, and ever so privileged to be able to work with my people and your people all through the United States. So I consider myself very, very blessed. My information is at the beginning, at the end. If you ever need anything, please reach out to me, and I will try to help you the best I can. So if you've been with us, throughout the week, you're hearing about some of the required policies that we need to become NAHASDA compliant, and the differences between policies and procedures, and how to understand what you need and put together those functions, within a procedure, and then make sure that your policy is legally compliant. Describe consequences of ineffective or absent policies and procedures, and outline, the difference between our projects and our programs, and make sure that we know exactly what we need to have those procedures in place for, and those policies, with proof of adoption, where we can easily, readily get a hold of them. We have them for anybody that requests them, because we're supposed to give them to them, and that we have them for auditing purposes, not only the audit for the tribe or your TDHE, but when HUD comes and does their monitoring visits, that's the first thing they do, is look at a lot of the policies. So the reference materials, please grab them, or at least, take a snapshot of it or circle that page so you can go to Code Talk. That's where we go to get everything from. Because the majority of these, are required by law, that we have policies and procedures for them, for your total development cost, for finance, using that program income, your procurement policy, changes to the federal micro purchase and our simplified acquisition threshold. You're allowed to do that, or your governing body, but you have to make sure you're adhering to watching this threshold, and then whatever your governing body has adopted. The insurance requirements, the useful life and binding commitments, Got a lot of slippage in Indian country about that. Make sure that you've got those policies and procedures in place. You're assisting non-low-income families. If you do that, in some instances, they can't receive the same amount of assistance as a low-income family. So make sure that you're adhering to that. Trying to see, I've got an open mic somewhere that I can hear. Or somebody's typing. Susan.
It's me. Sorry, I was like, wait a minute.
Yeah, no worries, my girl. Okay. You never want to have that open in case somebody comes in and says something that is not supposed to be on a mic. But there's a policy status table here for you guys too also. Okay, so good information. Make sure that at least you know what it is by the number. Then it's easier for you to find also. They've changed, like I said, a lot on the Code Talk website, but there's usually a search bar where at the very top, you're either going to go into your PIHN notices or you're going to go into your guidances, and then maybe you put in total development cost, and it should bring up any guidance that has total development cost in it if it works properly and if it's there. So we're down to the last day. Waiting list, selection, verification, lease requirements, structuring rent, occupancy, maintenance, inspection, home ownership, and lease with option of purchase, and compliance. So your waiting list legally is supposed to be in writing. HUD is you should have procedures for this. Very, very strict about removing people from your waiting list. So you should have a policy as or a procedure as to when and how you do that. You make sure at the minimum you note who did it, when you did it, and why you did it, and then put it in an inactive file, but keep that application package there, okay? Or, incomplete. If they don't bring you all the information. If somebody calls you and says, can you remove me from the waiting list? You should have a form, if possible, create one, that says, and ask them to come in and sign that. And that's really good proof for HUD. If not, that's exactly what you're going to put on there. Cheryl Cosley on September 5th at 2:13 removed, Katarina Pearson off of the waiting list for ATIHA at her request, so you're outlining when you did it, why you did it, and then that whole thing goes into an inactive file. So you should have a procedure basically saying how long the applications are good for before you need to update them also. So when it comes to your applications and your waiting list, there's a lot of rules that you need to outline and make sure that you have in place. So your applicant will complete a preliminary application to be determined eligible and placed on a waiting list. So I've been in places where, especially, and we have some in the audience right now, they're a housing department. So sometimes it's the front desk person that's taking that application, and they're never making it even back into the housing realm. Okay. Chances are that person is signing and dating that application. If you have anything that goes on like that, you should have a double signature page created for your applications. This is the day that it was received up front and by whom. This is the day that this was deemed a complete application. That's when they go on the actual waiting list. You don't want somebody saying to the tribal council, I've been on the waiting list at housing since 2023. I brought it in November. Well, if it wasn't complete, they never made the waiting list. And that's what you need is, that way to prove that no, it was never deemed complete. You should also have a checklist of what needs to be in an application package. And you make it 2 pages with the signature and a date line at the bottom. And this is what we need brought back to the office. This is the date that I give them that and told them that, or mailed it out. And you keep one on the packet and one goes to them. And then you pull it out and you say, no, we let you know in 2023 that we needed birth certificates, we needed proof of income for John Doe, and we needed a social security number from this person, and whatever items that you need. It's covering your 6 basically, because sometimes what they go and the story they tell to the tribal council is not always a complete one. So this way you can say, no, that is not what happened. So your waiting list should be updated annually. When your unit is available, the top 2 applicants notify it and ask to be interviewed and update all the information. Now, that is not what you definitely need to do. You normally pick 2 of everything. Even like when I was hiring for jobs, I would pick 2, the top and the second, just in case something happened with the first pick. And I've actually had that happen. So you don't have to convey everybody together and go through it all again. This is for the record, pick number 1 and pick number 2 of everybody that's sitting here doing these screenings. In this day and age, people sometimes have to sign contracts for the housing that they're in, and they can't get out of them, or they have to pay for them or whatever, and you offer them a unit, and sometimes they can't go. So that is another thing that you need to address in your policy. How many times can somebody reject a unit and stay, at the top of the list, or what's going to happen to them? You're going to put them down to the bottom of the list, or you're going to take them off, How many times are you going to let them sit at that top and reject it? They can't just wait until they finally get the one that they want, So that's something else you kind of have to look at too. So normally you pick your top 2 applicants, you notify the first one, and in the background you're asking them to make sure that somebody's contacting them. Is this still the same? Is this still the same? Is this still the same? Because if the information is basically over 30 days old, they consider it not timely. And you have to make sure that that applicant family is eligible at the time of admission. That's what they're going to check forever and ever about that file. So that's one of the things you're doing at that point. And then you're offering them, extending that offer for that unit. Staff verifies the applicant information, notifies them that everything is good. You can do that in person. You can do that however works best for you. And that's what you do. Now, closing a waiting list, that's perhaps, you have waiting lists for all of your programs, and they shouldn't all be on one list. You should have if different programs. If you have rehab, if you have down payment assistance, if you have low rental housing, if you have tenant-based rental assistance, depending on what you have, they should all have their separate list. And sometimes you've put in your IHP that you're going to offer, 10 people down payment assistance for, $5,000 or $10,000. Well, that might be all the money you have for the year. And as soon as they get to that point, you're out. So you have to say, am I going to keep taking applications for a program that I can't service anybody with until next year? Or am I going to close the waiting list and tell people, we'll start taking applications for this program in March of next year again, or however you decide to do that. So those are some of the decisions you have to make as far as that goes. You're allowed to put preferences and priorities on your waiting list. Your preferences actually affect the order of selection for your tribal members. A priority is a program-specific criteria and usually point-based. It's an elderly project, so we're going to prioritize the elders for that, or it's a home ownership. Maybe the priority is going to be for a first-time homeowner. A preference could be a veteran, so they're different things, and you need to know the difference. And, that might make, you might need to take like a admissions and occupancy class or something like that. So a policy excerpt, from a waiting list. The waiting list is the tool used to establish the order in which assistance offers are made to apparently qualified applicants. The ATIHA manager will designate staff to administer the waiting list policy, establish procedures to implement the policy, including preparation of a quality control system that ensures ethics and integrity in administering the waiting list and complying with the preferences and priorities established by this policy. So you're thinking, those of you that have never been in any of my classes, but I've got quite a few returning students here. ATIH, that's what I write for when I'm writing class material. That's any tribal Indian housing authority. So that's not an actual housing authority. That's any tribal housing authority. So a preference policy. This is an example. Preference 1, ATIHA family means the head or heads of household that are enrolled ATIHA members, the ATIHA with priority to those ATIH members who have never been assisted. Okay, so first preference is going to go to somebody that's never received help from the housing entity. Preference 2, maybe a Native Alaska member with occupants who are enrolled members. Preference 3 could be an enrolled member of a federally recognized tribe. So this obviously is written for an Alaskan. An Alaskan is going to give preference to Alaskans before they do any other Native. Now that's who we're supposed to basically serve. Low income Alaskans and Natives, depending on where you're at, Native Americans. So you do, and there are some places where I as a Native can go and get put on their list. But the majority of them will have a preference. So if they have anybody from their particular tribe or area, they're going to get in before I do. But I am legally allowed to be served because I'm a card-carrying Native. So that's the reason that you do that. An enrolled member of a federally recognized tribe with occupants who are enrolled ATIHA members. So maybe I'm in there non-married, but my children are members of that particular tribe. So, or an enrolled member of a federally enrolled member of a federally recognized tribe with occupants who are members of a federally recognized tribe. Okay, that would be the last preference there. So eligible family, individual composition, all ATIHA members means that the head or heads of household and at least one child are enrolled members of the ATIHA tribe. ATIHA couples are also included in the definition of all ATIHA families. A descendant Indian family means at least one of the heads of household is a descendant of the ATIHA tribe. Only an enrolled member of the ATIHA tribe can be the applicant. So there's some tribes that really, really limit their membership. But you will have people there in the areas, that don't qualify as a tribal member, but they're clarified or they're described as a descendant of, so. Single enrolled ATIHA tribal members are considered a family. So that goes back to the definition of family. And under NAHASDA, it's pretty much anybody. I remember the first time I read it. This is anybody, because it's a single person can be a family under NAHASDA. So the examples of waiting list priorities, income targeting, admission of certain percentage of families within certain income ranges, their residency, especially if you offer programs, in multiple counties, like my sister tribe does, tribal affiliation, employment, credit worthiness, mortgage readiness, elderly or a displaced single person, persons of a disability, or, perhaps a first-time homebuyer. So under selection, your tenant and homebuyer selection, the owner or manager of affordable rental housing assisted with grant amounts provided under this act, so that means this is coming from the NAHASDA statute, shall adopt and utilize written tenant and homebuyer selection policies and criteria that is consistent with the purposes of providing housing for low-income families, are reasonably related to program eligibility and the ability of the applicant to perform the obligations of the lease and provide for the selection of tenants and homebuyers from a written waiting list in accordance with the policies and goals set forth in their Indian housing plan for the tribe that is the grant beneficiary of such grant amounts. The prompt notification in writing to any rejected applicant of that rejection and the grounds for that rejection. So that tells you that policy has to identify what you consider prompt is. And when you put in that definition, so make sure you look at your A&O policy, your admissions and occupancy policy, and see if you actually, address that. And what is prompt? So I always tell, make sure business days or calendar days. To give yourself longer amount of time, you would use business days, but under prompt, I always said 10 business days. Should you have a holiday in there, and I'm thinking November and December because that's when we have the majority of them, that will give you time to still have staff there to send out that rejection, should that happen during that time period. Because we know between Christmas and New Year's, 10 calendar days could occur rather quickly with nobody in the office. Business days are going to, shorten that a little bit too. So always identify what you're using for your days too. So screening for eligibility involves consideration of numerous factors, program requirements, income restrictions, established preferences, your established priorities. And although many of these factors may be locally determined, a written eligibility policy provides specific guidance regarding determining eligibility. So your preferences affect only the order of selection of your applicants on the waiting list. Your policies must identify available preferences, so they have to be listed in your A&O policy, and give the applicants an opportunity to show that they qualify for available preferences. The preference specifically identified under NAHASDA allows recipients to give preference to recipient tribal members first in providing housing assistance. So your priorities, the admission policies may also identify priorities within program preferences to ensure consistency with specific program requirements or to correct any inequities, such as families who have never been assisted versus those who have been previously assisted. The recipient shall establish priorities for the following: income targeting, income tiers, broad range of income goals, never been served, elderly, homeless, displacement by a natural disaster, a governmental action, domestic violence, or veterans. Those are some of the priorities that you can put into place or, within your policy. You don't have to. You can say, we're going to come, first serve. But you're usually going to want to say of, FAMILS members or FAMILS families, or at least have a little bit there. But there are some places, that you can do it by the lottery, as long as you do it consistently, and that's what's in your A&O policy, okay? So for the selection of a house, an example, applicants must be first determined to be eligible, which includes completion of an initial homebuyer education class. Applicants must be able to qualify for mortgage readiness with a maximum of 3 years within 36 months. Qualifications. Applicants must execute and participate in completing a client action plan and meet the qualifications for mortgage readiness within 3 years. So our next module is your verification. What do you have to verify? Okay, the income, the assets, the asset income. It's basically you're counting the assets the income derived from the assets. So you're not counting the $500 in the bank account. You're counting the $1.50 made off the $500 in interest. Okay. You have income exclusions, allowances, and deductions. It's really important, we went through those yesterday, that you follow those statutory deductions. And then if you decide that you're going to offer any more, or you really can't reduce the amount of the statutory deduction, but you can increase them. They want you to make sure that you're cognizant of that's going to, the effect that'll have on your yearly subsidy or the money that you have coming in when you raise those. But you can. So be careful there. Like I said, make sure that you give all the statutory ones. And if you want additional ones, you have to have proof that your governing body wants to raise them or give an additional one for a purpose. A good example, I guess, would be they don't usually allow a deduction for a foster child. Okay, that came over from public housing. So a lot of the housing authorities have made the change that because in Indian country we don't allow our children to basically go into the foster care system. Somebody within the family, the grandma, the auntie, I raised my granddaughter till she was 13, 14. Her mom just worked ungodly hours, at night, at the casinos, things like that. So she was with us the majority of the time. I wasn't within, the program, but if I had been, even though she was in my household, she would have been considered a foster child unless I would have legally adopted her. And there's no method for a dependent deduction for a foster child. So a lot of housing authorities will change it and they'll list it in their IHP, such language as any child in the household for over, 3 months or 6 months within the year will be eligible for the dependent deduction. Something simple as that. And then it would match the same amount that you would give any other, household member. So things like that you can put into place, but you have to just have proof that your governing body has decided that. You put it in your A&O policy and you put it in your IHP. Okay. So your allowances and your deductions have to be verified. The family composition has to be verified. You have to verify the ages. And the reason for that is because to be eligible for some deductions, you have to be of a certain age. So, or for certain deductions. So that you wouldn't have to count somebody's income, you might want to verify that that person is under the age of 18. Or they're a full-time student and they're not the head of household or the co-head or the sole occupant. Then they would get a dependent deduction, and then you would only count, that first portion, and then the rest would be clear. So there's certain things that you have to verify in order to give them a deduction also. Social Security numbers. You have to verify those Social Security numbers. So more to be verified, the family members under 18. Why? So you don't have to count their money. You can give them a deduction, a dependent deduction, the age or the disability of the head of the household or the spouse. Or, the elderly or disabled deduction, the disability of other family members, full-time student status, child care costs, excessive travel costs, disability assistance expenses, unreimbursed medical. Now remember, when they say unreimbursed medical expenses, we are in Indian country. A lot of our health expenses are paid for through Indian Health. So you have to keep that in mind, and you should be checking to see if anybody is trying to utilize that, if Indian Health is helping at all. Your verification standards. This is something that confused me at first. There's first, second, and third party verification. I always thought first was better than third. No, in this instance, third is better than first. Second is better than first. It goes in the reverse order. What that is basically is, and it again comes over from public housing, they don't want the tenant hand carrying or having the ability to, give you less check stubs or anything like that. They would rather that everything you get come from the employer. You can send, self-addressed envelopes, things like that. One of the greatest assets we had was because our tribe is a huge employer here with the casinos and the tribal offices and the medical centers and everything else. Human resources, we can get that information just quick if they're a tribal employee. It's a lot easier than getting it through the family, and it's actually considered third party, so it's a better way to do that. So second party is you utilize it when third party is unobtainable or not timely. Sometimes you can send things to employers and you hit a wall. Nothing comes back. If you have to go through the phone to do that, you make sure you document who you talked to, when you talked to them, what you talked about, and what information that you gathered was. You ask them to send it to you in writing, but if you don't get it, at least that should hold up. So your phone or interview by recipient staff, recipient record information, the date and time of contact, the name and the source of the information, the recipient staff's name and signature. I'm the, Cheryl A. Cosley received this. The summary of the information that they give me and the rationale for using that oral verification. And then first party verification is the least preferred. They really don't want, things hand carried. So you can come about, and after you've been in business for a while and doing things, you'll have a lot of verification forms. If not, get on the internet or go to your housing regional meetings and see what your neighbors have. See what, don't recreate the wheel. See what the other housing authorities have and things like that. You're going to have your consent for release of information, verification of employment, verification of income, trust income, savings, pensions, landlord verifications. There's all sorts of verifications out there. Verifications of zero income. So the one that HUD utilizes is an authorization for release of information, that Privacy Act statement. All adult family members and spouses must sign, can be used between regular re-exams to verify unreported income. The applicant's certification that income and other information is accurate and complete. Sometimes they will recommend that you put something on your forms that authorizes the use of a copied signature. Otherwise, maybe you should be having them sign 10 of them. I'm a big proponent of, when I work with A&O and things like that, 5-year calendars, 3-year calendars, a way out there for your A&O staff too, so they can document when somebody within the household is going to be 18. We need to do this on that date. Write it in, use pencils so you can scratch it out if something happens, or erase it. But so when the people are going to turn 18, when somebody's going to become an elder, and you write that down as you're going through their folders, and that it's a reminder. It's a jiggler. You can't remember all of that, and sometimes they don't, and they are entitled to deductions when they become an elder. You need a verification form when that person turns 18. If they're working now, you got to start counting their income. So all of that stuff, it's just, things to make your department go a little better. So, I was this many years old when I learned this. Well, I was probably, 5-6 years at least in as a housing director when I realized that authorization form from HUD is only valid for 15 months. I don't know. I must have thought it was valid forever, or I didn't think about it is what it was. But it's only valid for 15 months. So basically, every time they come in there, and definitely during all your research, you have them sign new ones. because those are going to expire. Okay. They're also supposed to be only used for the verification sources listed on the form. So you list everybody within your area that you verify things from. You might just put employers, you know. Then there's release forms, you know, obtaining information for verification purposes. You know, those require a signed consent for release of information from the family member whose information is being requested. Your participant information, okay? All the participant information is considered protected, personally identifiable information. It's required to be kept confidential. You should have statements from your staff. You should have the forms, you know, informing your board of commissioner and your tribal council members that they don't have the right to get into your tenant files. Certain things like that. Just be careful with that. Be careful with what your staff discusses. I've been at places where the staff sat around and had discussions about their families within housing. And I said, hey, this is not right. Your maintenance men don't need to know any of this information. That information is a need to know basis. So be careful. The information that you share, even within your staff, you should have policies about who gets what, who has rights to what. As for the tenant files, we actually built vestibules with locked doors that had a keypad code on there. And you should have a form in there for your tenant files. Who signed it out? Of the people that are even allowed to go in there to get those. You need to limit that access. When it comes to healing to wellness courts, any kind of drug information, any kind of background check information, that's supposed to be kept totally separate, not even in that file. So you guys have to have good protocols for that also. And then you need to have your policies in place, your procedures in place about who can talk to your tenants about what. Your maintenance people have no business going into during an inspection or acting like they're the boss of anything, because they're not. There's only certain people within your realm, your housing, that are allowed to do that. So make sure that all of that's in place also. So a confidentiality policy sample, protecting your residents and applicants, whereas any tribal Indian tribal housing authority provides decent, safe, and sanitary housing to low-income Native households in accordance with HUD guidelines, and where they seek to protect the interest of the residents and applicants by prohibiting the exploitive use of personal information to the extent permitted by tribal and state law. The housing authority, entity, department, whatever you are, you know, is also mandated by HUD confidentiality requirements to protect tenant information and housing authority records. In all cases, the release of housing authority records requires the prior written approval of the housing authority's executive director. I have seen cases where it says, and the tenant. Depends on, you know, what your governing body sees fit. Now, therefore, be it resolved that it is the policy of the housing authority to protect the interest of the people we serve to the maximum extent permitted by law. All employees, members of the authority, including the housing commissioners and tribal council, are required to abide by this standard. Only inspectors, auditors, investigators, and others who are engaged in their normal functions as approved by the Department of Housing and Urban Development may have access to the confidential information concerning residents and applicants. Now, I get paid basically through a HUD contract. So if I go in and somebody says, hey, will you help me with these files? You're not in breach of that because I'm getting paid through HUD. I have permission to be there to be doing that. Your auditors do. Your HUD officials do during their monitoring. But when it comes to anybody else, they're not supposed to see that. Your board of commissioners have no business being in a file. You need to find a system that protects your tenants. Basically, you don't identify them by name, even when you're talking about their tenant account receivables. I have someone in a 3-bedroom unit. Give them a numbering system so they don't know who they're talking about, especially should they have relations on that board. You need to have mechanisms like that in place. I was one place where they utilized, names, and one of the commissioners was actually the father of somebody that they were talking about, and they owed money. He was mortified. I could see by the look on his face that he was mortified. He went out there and paid the back balance. He shouldn't have known that that was his son. I'm like, whoa, you guys, you got to fix something here. This is not right. Even when you talk about evicting somebody and you bring that up, it's better for them to have no idea who it is. So find a mechanism, identify them by numbers, but don't be, speaking about your tenants either. So recertification, not required, but highly recommended. It's very highly recommended because of the fact that you have to prove that you're not charging them over 30% of their income. How are you going to do that if you're not recertifying them? Do it once a year. Do it more if they're in there and they're an active participant whose income goes up and down, and they add somebody to the family and they have a baby and somebody becomes a senior. A lot of things can affect that amount. Okay. Scheduling can be on a lease execution anniversary, or you can do them all at once. We used to do our inspections and our research basically at the same time. And our inspections would be no later than this time of the year, unless it was a move in or a move out, because we want, the snow will be coming. It's 40 degrees here already. Snow's usually here by the end of next month. You want to be able to see the yards. So you can do that. You can do the research all at once by project, however works best for your organization. Your boots are supposed to be in every unit you have at least once a year, though. Okay, so make sure you do that. Your process should begin 90 days in advance. Why do you do that? Because for one thing, for cleaning, you want them to have time to prep for your arrival so you'll pass. For your research, you want to give them time to gather all that information that you need. Use third-party verification when possible. Give at least 30-day notice of a rent increase. You can write your policy so it reads that we will give you 30 days for a rent increase. If you come and tell us, or it's, it will be an immediate increase if we should discover that your rent has gone up, or, you've added additional income and you did not tell us. So there's an incentive there for them to be able to, come in and be timely with you. Some of your interim recertification examples could be a job loss, retirement, change in family composition, death, birth, resident moves out, changes income, pay raise, new job, unemployed resident becomes employed, substantial increase in allowances, childcare, travel expenses, or the resident turns 62. Okay, so your lease requirements. I don't keep this wide open to see anything, in case there's any messages. NAHASDA statutory deductions. It showed the deduction for an elderly or disabled family at $400. Did that go up to $525 of last year? Tasha, that depends on if you changed your A&O policy and if you're using the Section 8 definition. Okay? That's what I was talking about for the tribes having until December to get into compliance and to redo their A&O policy. If they're using Section 8 or using the definition that you're going to use all three. Okay. We have a time and date stamp for received and one for complete. Will that work? Perhaps, as long as you finagle it to show that. Low rent mutual help should have two separate lists. Yes, unless they're two different programs. One is a home ownership program, and the other one is a low rent program. Who verifies the release of information? You wouldn't need a verification of the release of information. It should be in the tenant file. You should be getting it for everybody over the age of 18. And every time somebody comes in, you should be opening it to the signed one to see when the dates are. I think that's what you mean by verification. Glad you could join us, Miranda. We've been talking about admissions and occupancy, A&O, so we get it, but does it have to be verified elsewhere? No, not signed. Okay, I'm confused, Tasha, but I think you're talking about verification. You always, if you can, have them sign those verifications in front of you. Now, I know of some places that say, go get everybody in your household to sign this that's over the age of 18. Now, since I've been around since 1990, I know of one horror story where somebody forged a signature. And then they ran a criminal lien and they found out about basically the background of somebody, and he didn't sign the consent form to run the criminal lien. It cost them the unit. Mom not getting his signature. So be very careful with that. I used to ask that all applications be turned in person. We didn't take applications by mail. We would send them to them, but when it came time to process them or turn them in, we wanted them in person. We wanted the person in our area, for one thing, that was applying for that unit. So that's up to you. So it's basically, it's a release of information. It doesn't get further verified. You use that for verification purposes. And witness the signature normally. And hopefully, Tasha, that explained it. If not, okay. I was going to say, if not, you have my phone number. You can call me. It's at the end of the thing. So I don't want to make people late for class. If required proof of income is provided, do we have to have further verification? No, you use the verification form, use the HUD one, and then you're allowed to go verify their income utilizing that form. Okay. Okay, so we're going to get back here. I won't be able to see anybody in chat until I check it again. So your lease requirements, section 207, the lease requirements and tenant selection. Leases, except to the extent otherwise provided or inconsistent with tribal law, in renting dwelling units in affordable housing assisted with grant amounts provided under this act, the owner or manager of the housing shall utilize leases that they cannot contain unreasonable terms or conditions. They cannot require the owner or manager to maintain the housing in compliance with applicable housing codes and quality standards, or they can, excuse me. They require the owner or manager to give adequate notice of termination of the lease. Most places, say 30 days notice, which shall be the period of time required by state, tribal, and local law. Specify that with respect to any notice of eviction termination, notwithstanding any state, tribal, or local law, a resident shall be informed of the opportunity prior to hearing or trial to examine any relevant documents, records, regulations directly related to the eviction or the termination. Require that the owner or manager may not terminate the tenancy during the term of the lease except for serious or repeated violations of the term or conditions of the lease, violation of applicable federal, state, tribal, or local law, and or for other good cause, and provide that the owner or manager may terminate the tenancy of a resident for any activity engaged in by the resident, any member of the household of the resident, any guest you have to tell them when you're doing their move-in requirements that they are responsible for the conduct of their guests. Their guests can get them evicted, okay? Or other person under control of the resident. So I didn't hear anybody share during the week, but next week, Monday through Friday, at this very time and station, we're going to call it a station now, I'm teaching A&O on here. Admissions and occupancy. There's a class, a 5-day class next week. Okay, it's the last class I'm teaching until summertime for NLC. So those of you that are weak in these areas or just want to strengthen it up or make sure that somebody's, tune in. Okay. So your lease, your rental agreement, the requirements, overview, orientation, rent, execution of lease agreement, modifications to the lease agreement, principal residence, security deposits, payments under the lease, rules and regulations for safety and quiet enjoyment. You have to provide for peaceful enjoyment of the premises, which means if they're acting up and having parties, they could be disturbing the neighbors on the other side of them. And you have to provide that for them also. Illegal acts, the maintenance of that unit, the inspections of the unit, housekeeping standards, tenant damage, pets, service animals, guest, signer of your dwelling lease no longer living in the unit, unauthorized acts, collections, termination, all of that needs to be in those agreements. So when it comes time to structuring a rent, building a new project, let's say you're going to build, 5 new units or 10 new units, you have to look at how much it's going to cost you to rent those units, to run those units. You don't collect all of your monies unless they are standalone units. If they're an apartment building or something like that, you have overhead costs that keep coming, There's various ways to calculate the rent and the home buyer rent, including at least, you can utilize income-based rent. It could be a mixed income, market survey-driven rent, a break-even rent, and making sure that you understand what your operating expenses are. What are you going to consider? The program requirements, the affordability analysis. What can your tenants afford to pay? Refer to the data from a needs assessment if you had one. You try to do a needs assessment of your tribal people every 5 years if you can, at least, 10 years, but 5 years is really good to find out what the people that are out there right now, what do they need? What do they want? The type of housing, the design, the subsidy requirements, the financing available, those requirements, your contractor, if you're going to use force account, different adjustments. So there's lots of things that factor into how much that house or that apartment or whatever is going to cost to maintain and to run. So under 1,124, the maximum and minimum rent a homebuyer payment, can you charge your low-income tenants or your homebuyers residing in housing assisted with your NAHASDA grant amounts? Bottom line, not to exceed 30% of the adjusted income. You cannot charge them more unless they're your tenants that you're utilizing that 10% authority for that fall between 80 and 100% of median income. That has to be in your IHP. You have to track that 10% authority. In that case, you have to charge them more. The other factor is if you have them in there on a repayment agreement, that repayment agreement, they owe you money, okay? That repayment agreement is not factored into that 30%, okay? You figure out the 30% before what they owe you. So a recipient can charge a low-income rental tenant or home buyer rent or home buyer payments not to exceed 30% of the adjusted income of that family. You can also decide to compute your rental and homebuyer payments on any lesser percentage of adjusted income of the family. The requirement applies only to units assisted with your NAHASDA grant amounts. NAHASDA does not set minimum rents or homebuyer payments. However, you as a recipient may do so. Okay? You can set a minimum rent, but the law reads that if your minimum rent exceeds 30%, you still can't charge them that. Okay, so just make sure that you're adhering to that. You always do that 30% test. Now, there are times where you'll have somebody perhaps build elder housing. That's all that's in there is elder housing. They might charge them 25% or 20%. But realize that, that's going to be it's going to cost you on a yearly basis out of your yearly subsidy or grant amount money to offer that. Okay. And you have to track that because that's less money you can put anywhere else. And it's ongoing when you do that. So that's what they always want you to look at, what the cause and effect of a utility allowance is, of raising the amount of a dependent deduction, of lowering the age of an elder and giving them the elder disability deduction, things like that. They want to see that you looked at what that overall cost is going to be on an ongoing basis to the amount that you receive on a yearly basis. Okay. So 1,126, may a recipient charge flat or income adjusted rents? Well, yes, you can. Bottom line is, as long as it does not exceed the 30% of the family's adjusted income. So that's what you read every time that you read, can I do this? Can I do that? Well, yes, you can, as long as it does not exceed 30% of the family's adjusted income. That's a law that I watched years and years ago, them trying to change up on the Hill, and Congress would not have it. Very stickler about that. So 1,128 is income verification required for assistance under NAHASDA. Yes, the recipient must verify the family is income eligible based on anticipated annual income. The family is required to provide documentation to verify this determination. The recipient is required to maintain the documentation on which this determination of eligibility is based. Remember, I said you got to move that from file to file. Make sure your procedures do that, or your policies. The recipient may require a family to periodically verify its income in order to determine housing payments or continued occupancy consistent with your local adopted policies. When income verification is required, the family must provide documentation which verifies its income, and this documentation must be retained by the recipient. Your admissions and occupancy policy, your A&O policy, should state failure to complete required inspections or recertifications will be grounds for termination of your lease. I have been in places where people say, I'm not going to do that. Well, fine. Then you can't be part of our program. This is required by federal law, and that's what I usually explain to the council. And unless you want to, risk losing your money on behalf of one tenant for all of your tribal members, it's required. You have to do this. This is one of the things you have to do to get this money. So that's what you usually tell that tenant. I'm sorry if you don't want to do that. Well, we'll have to ask you to leave our program. But your A&O policy has to tell them that. They have to do the verification. They have to do the inspection. Make sure that it does. May a recipient charge a non-low-income family rent or home buyer payments, which are more than 30% of the family's adjusted income? Yes, a recipient may charge a non-low-income family rent or home buyer payments, which are more than 30% of the family's adjusted income. In accordance with the documentation, it's in your reference materials, that deal with non-low income families, you must, if they're under your 10% authority, charge them more. Okay. So what are the costs that you do consider? What does it cost to build an apartment building? And I don't mean to physically build those units. What's the ongoing cost? You have management. You have collection losses. You have vacancy losses. The time it turns, your maintenance guys to get that place back up to new. The maintenance cost on an ongoing basis, the replacement of, the product within there, your heaters, your roofs, your things like that over, a period of time. The utilities, especially for the common areas, those hallways, things like that. Those are ongoing costs that you have to factor in. So when it comes to setting that rent, you can set your rents at 30% of the adjusted income, minimum rents with a 30% test. You could allow for a lower percentage of income. You could do a flat rent, as long as you do the 30% test. Lower percentages allowed for certain families. That's your elders usually. Must be low income at the time of initial occupancy, okay, unless they're essential, or you put them under the law enforcement provision. Non-low income cannot receive the same benefits as your low income tenants, unless they're under one of those two provisions. So your TTP is your total tenant payment. It's the amount a tenant is expected to contribute for rent based on a percentage of adjusted income. For NAHASDA programs, cannot exceed 30% of the monthly adjusted income. They want that pounded into your head. I've been instructed from HUD when working with people to make sure that that is scattered throughout the policy numerous times, so that nobody forgets it. Utility allowances, okay, under the 1937 Act, we were required to give a utility allowance. Under NAHASDA, you are not. And a utility allowance can cost your ongoing grant amount a lot of money over the years. So you keep that into consideration when you're setting your rents also. Are you going to provide a utility allowance? Okay. It may be required or allowed by you as the recipient. So I'm going to do a very short example for you how to figure out a rent, okay, for a building. So we have a family of 4 dependents. Remember the head of household, the sole occupant, the co-head can never be considered a dependent. They can never get a dependent deduction. The annual income coming in is $27,000 to this household. They get 4 dependent deductions of $480 a piece. Comes out to $1,920 a year. They have child care cost of $1,000 and $1,800. No, $1,080, excuse me. So their total adjustments for this family is $3,000. So now their income went from $27,000 to their adjusted annual income of $24,000. Take that $24,000, divide it for the 12 months in the year. Their adjusted monthly income is $2,000. So the monthly gross rent, $2,000 times 30%, the most you can charge this family is $600 under any circumstance, okay? In this case, they provide a utility allowance of $250 a month. Now the rent has gone from $600 to $350 a month. The annual revenue, if you collect everything that this family owes you throughout the year, you will collect $4,200 off of that unit for the year, okay? That's if you collect it all, which is not often. So now Housing Authority wants to build 20 more. We're going to use that same family's income, okay? $2,000 adjusted monthly income. if you used maximum, charged them 30%, which is the max you can charge them, gross rent would be $600. They're not going to give them a utility allowance, okay? The net rent would be $600 per unit. We're going to build 100 units. Their monthly revenue would be $60,000 a month if you collected it all, okay? The annual revenue would be $720,000, okay? For this particular 100 unit complex, it costs $900,000 to run for a year. That's collections, maintenance, move outs, electricity to the common areas, water, your fire suppression system, all that fun stuff, okay? Electricity, all of that. So, $900,000 for the 100 units that you're offering your tribal members. You're going to still need $180,000 subsidy on a yearly basis to operate those 100 units. You're looking at figuring out what we're going to charge them. You have somebody that's going to probably go into it and they're saying, why not charge them 20% instead of 30%? What would that cost us? And why don't we give them a utility allowance? We don't have to give them much. We'll give them $100 a month. Okay, you've only changed it that much. You went from 30 to 20 and you give them a $100 utility allowance in place of none. Now to operate the 100 units, you still have your $900,000 cost. You're going to need $540,000 from your subsidy on a yearly basis to run those 100 units. Then you have the tribe that doesn't want to charge, doesn't want to charge their tribal members because they're in there too. So they're going to charge 10%. They're going to tweak that utility allowance up to $200. And now for that 100 units, it would cost the full $900,000 that you figured that it would cost to run and operate those units. So they'd need $900,000 on a yearly basis just to keep those 100 units up and going. So you really need to look at the cost and your cause and effect of what a utility allowance, what will do, and what charging 30% to 20 or 30 to 25 is going to cost your program. So I always recommend that you run through a little bit of an exercise when they're looking at them, because that's $900,000 that you can't offer in any other, you can't use for modernization, you can't use for TVRA, you can't use for down payment assistance. That's straight out of your budget. And unless you're, Navajo, which gets a whole lot of money, or you're Cherokee and they get a whole lot of money, most places can't afford to do that, because that pretty much, eats up the majority, a lot of your money for the year, so take that into mind. But what I will say about those larger places, they know better than to do that. So they usually won't do that either, because they know the value of that money and how you need to be prudent. So you can offer the most you can to all your tribal members, because you're already servicing them by giving them, a reduced cost, fair, nice household. I remember that we had somebody that was on our staff and was complaining about her rent. And I looked at her and I says, you go out and find me a comparable 3-bedroom house with an attached garage for the amount you pay, and show me that you can rent it, and I'll pay your rent next month out of my own pocket. And she couldn't do it. She couldn't do it counties wide. Because we're already subsidizing them for them, keep them up. Don't allow them to move in without having your maintenance staff bring them back up to new. Give them a new paint job, redo the tile, redo the carpet, whatever you're going to do. Give them homes that they can be proud of, So my chairmans used to say, you're providing more than a house. You're providing a community and a home for your tribal members. Do better. And we always tried to. So you can have potential issues if you build outside of your jurisdiction. So you're sitting here on the reservation. The tribe has sovereignty. They have civil jurisdiction over, all these properties. The tribe, the TDHE, can limit assistance to Indian families. That's who that money is for, low-income Indian families, and provide for tribal preferences, okay? If you're from Bay Mills, you're going to go ahead of, that Sioux tribe person. That person from, Keweenaw Bay or one of these other Michigan tribes, they can do that. If block grant funds and other funds are mixed, kind of ties your hands. You become subject to non-discrimination requirements used for affordable housing projects. If you build off of the reservation, you might have to put a payment in lieu of taxes into place. Okay, now there's guidance on that you can look up. It goes back to 2003-02. We are not allowed to pay property taxes with NAHASDA funds. Now, I know that there was one set of COVID funds that allowed people to pay property taxes. Don't make that mistake with NAHASDA funds. We are not allowed to do it. Make sure that all of your policies and your procedures for rehab and things like that state that their taxes must be up to date. You are not allowed to pay them, okay? So you have to find out, because we're not allowed to pay those taxes when you're building off of the reservation, that they're going to provide fire services, police, ambulance services, water, things like that. And you are able to give them a payment in lieu of taxes, but it's very spelled out to what you can do. And if you are in that circumstance, make sure that you pull up that program guidance. It's 2003-02. Like I said, because we can't pay taxes. So utilities can be considered a part of rent or homebuyer payments if you decide to define your rent or homebuyer payments to include utilities in your written policies on rent and homebuyer payments, required by Section 203 of NAHASDA. You may define rents and homebuyer payments to exclude utilities under NAHASDA also. You can read about that at 1132. So your occupancy and maintenance, the other areas which you're going to have occupancy issues, bedroom size based on family size standards are not required by law, okay? Does your applicant meet the definition of a family? Does the family's income fall within prescribed limits? Are they a suitable customer and able to meet the requirements of the program? So you can decide whether you're going to run criminal liens or not on them. You run criminal lien on one applicant, you need to be running it on all of your applicants, okay? You can't just pick and choose. Remember the consistency. Maintenance. Who's responsible? What are the standards? What enforcement measures are prescribed? How frequently do you inspect? The larger agency, department, housing that you have, the more often that you can inspect. What they really suggest is a brand new tenant be inspected more frequently than a tenant that has been there for a while. You give them, an inspection every 3 months or every 6 months. They pass them a series of times, and then you reduce the amount of inspections, and you finally get them to an annual inspection, unless they fail. The minute that somebody fails an inspection, you start those inspections more often. A lot of damage can happen to your units in between visits. I've seen like $35,000 to $40,000 worth of damage when we didn't do one for a whole year. So you can't let that, you have to be prudent there. So the requirements: you maintain your owned and managed units, allocate funds to provide for continued maintenance and efficient operations of your housing inventory, identify the method in which the inventory will be protected and maintained. Some of the types of maintenance: preventative, corrective, routine, janitorial, emergency, cosmetic, and deferred maintenance. Scheduling your preventative maintenance is annual basis by month. Your routine maintenance is monthly basis or by week. Your daily maintenance, you schedule work for the next day. Your work orders, okay? Make sure they're completed. Make sure they're signed off that the work is done. If you charge somebody for maintenance, make sure that you prove and you document that you did that maintenance, because HUD will look for that, okay? Code, filing number, the date of the issue, the date and the time of the action, the signature of the issuers, who's writing that work order, description of the work to be performed or the problem to be solved, the description of the equipment necessary, what charge account number are you going to charge it to, what is the required craft, can your guys do it, do you have to hire a plumber, do you need an electrician, what type of work was performed, what were the materials used, because you have to charge that material to either them or your program, time to complete the work, how many hours did it take to complete it, the date and the time that it was started and it was completed. Don't, your maintenance guys, your poor maintenance guys, don't allow everybody to call them and send them all over the place, because it destroys this. Let them complete their work. There should only be certain amount of people that can direct the maintenance staff off of a unit and not, okay? It gets bad when you do that too often. So we have a question. Put your answer in, please, the comment section or the chat section. When can the tribe or the TDHE charge a renter for maintenance? Renters pay all the maintenance? Never. When damage is beyond normal wear and tear, or always? Thank you guys for answering so quick. Okay, yes, you could offer utility allowances for elder units only. You'd have to, put that in your meeting minutes, get permission of everybody. Make sure that if you do that, it's reflected and you have a resolution. Your IHBG subsidy. Okay, mutual help units that were built with 1937 Housing Act come with a subsidy attached to them. Most mutual help units should be conveyed almost by now, okay? But anything built pre-NAHASDA, so before 1996, was built with 1937 Act housing funds. Those housing funds came with a subsidy. Mutual help had one amount of a subsidy. The rental had one amount of a subsidy. If you have rental houses built with 1937 Housing Act, it's called CAS, it's current assisted stock, you're still receiving the subsidy for those, okay? That's a very shortened version of that. Protect those units at all cost, protect that subsidy at all cost, because they don't offer it anymore. And make sure that those are the first priority of your staff. And yes, guys, when damage is beyond wear and tear, that's when you do charge them. Okay. So, inspections. What to include in an inspection policy. Is it an annual inspection, the initial inspection? Is it disposition? You have forms, standard notices, tenant damage, housekeeping standards, work orders, scheduling, billing, notice of findings, and sometimes tenant education. The inspection requirements under the statute at 403, periodic monitoring not less frequently than annually. Each recipient shall review the activities conducted, housing assisted under the Act, to assess compliance with the requirements of the Act. Such review shall include on-site inspection of housing to determine compliance with the applicable requirements. The results of each review shall be included in your performance report of the recipient submitted to the Secretary under 404 and made available to the public. So they're talking about your annual performance report. Initial inspections by the recipient must be performed on all units constructed, acquired, rehabbed with NAHASDA funds, subsequent to the provision of such assistance, during the provision of such assistance, and prior to occupancy by the beneficiary household. in the instance of an existing owner-occupied housing upon completion of the rehab work. And the purpose of these inspections is to ensure that work performed and or the condition of the housing unit meets your, as a recipient, performance standards, okay? Bottom line, your boots are supposed to be in every unit that you own on a yearly basis, even your home ownership, because of the fact that until they enter into that or complete their home ownership agreement, let's say a 25-year agreement, they're in their 23rd year and they breach it or they don't want the house anymore or whatever the reason, that house comes back to the housing and you have to bring it all the way back up to brand new. You are much better off going in there on a yearly basis, doing the inspection and making sure that, you know, that household is being maintained, you know, holes in the walls, your doors, things like that. Your maintenance guys can go in there and repair that and charge your tenants for them. If you don't have handyman in the area, or you tell them, we would like this corrected by this date, we'll be back in to see. If not, we're going to have our guys do it and we're going to charge you. Your inspection policy, this is an excerpt. Requirements apply to all units constructed, acquired, rehabbed with NAHASDA funds owned by the recipient and those assisted units not owned by the recipient, but for which the recipient has an ongoing responsibility to provide maintenance. It applies to all units constructed, acquired, or rehabilitated using NAHASDA funds covered by a lease purchase agreement under the conditions described below to ensure that the maintenance is being provided by the occupant or purchaser, applied to rental and home ownership units under conditions described below that were constructed, acquired, or rehabbed using funds under the 1937 Housing Act. Under the provisions of Section 502, these units shall be considered and maintained as affordable housing for the purposes of NAHASDA. It does not apply to owner-occupied units that receive NAHASDA assistance for rehab or units that are being purchased by a family with NAHASDA-based financing or mortgage assistance. However, like all other assisted units, these units must receive initial inspections by the recipient prior to occupancy by the beneficiary household and may be conducted more or less frequently than annually. So this is just somebody else's policy. Frequency. Inspections will be conducted at least annually to ensure the participant is meeting their responsibility for providing routine and non-routine maintenance. New participants, this is if you have a big enough staff, schedule monthly inspections for at least the next 3 months. Will meet the mandatory attendance at the maintenance counseling class known as the Better Renters Series. Upon a satisfactory determination that the participant is meeting their maintenance obligations, schedule inspections every 3 months. So they go from monthly to every 3 months. After a satisfactory determination that the participant is now meeting the maintenance obligations, schedule the inspections at every 6 months. Upon a satisfactory determination, meeting their maintenance obligations, schedule the inspections on a yearly basis. For your existing participants, schedule a regular inspection at least annually. Upon a satisfactory determination that the participant is meeting their maintenance obligations and is in compliance with the terms of the lease, schedule the next inspection for next year. Upon a dissatisfactory determination, apply appropriate level of scheduled inspections to ensure the corrected action has been taken. Depending on the severity, the ATIHA executive director will prescribe a schedule accordingly. Upon a serious finding of non-compliance, terminate or follow procedures for new participants. Okay, home ownership and lease with option to purchase. You review the home ownership policy and attachments. This is a sample mortgage lending process that you could utilize at a later date or peruse. Some of the requirements: property management experience, understand single family housing management issues within your community, maintain a clear division of maintenance responsibilities between tenants and owners, and eligibility requirements are different than rental program requirements. Some of the goals: helps the home buyers to save for down payment, closing costs, mortgage replacement reserves, opportunity to train potential home buyers on obligations of home ownership, provide home ownership opportunities to non-traditional home buyers. That's consistent with the tradition of Native families owning their own home. Your lease option, that period could vary. A low-income housing tax credit, LIHTC, is a 15-year minimum, then the home is bought or conveyed. Mortgage driven is usually 1 to 5 years, typical, then the home is bought with a mortgage loan. Different needs could be different designs. So use and occupancy agreement, which is also known as a lease. The term amount of time to be mortgage ready, but not to exceed the option period. You address the same things as a rental lease. Grounds for termination, minimum rent can be a debt payment plus the admin and the management fee and your inspections. The mortgage-driven lease purchase, it's a firm option to purchase period. You design your lease period to match the readiness of your client. Minor credit repair and counseling, perhaps 2 years. More extensive issues, you could probably give them up to 4 to 5. Option to purchase expires. Homeowner education is critical for the success. Homebuyers must get loans to purchase, solve issues hindering their readiness to buy, and does not solve insufficient income for your families. So your financial capacity of the recipient, down payment and closing costs to purchase the property, subsidies to make properties affordable to target, the market of your home buyers, unrestricted cash balance to cover market changes or rent losses, plan to remarket or improve market or convert to rental those properties that the initial renters do not purchase. And upon sale, the proceeds flow to the seller. Use dependent upon the house, how the seller financed that development. You could pay down a tribal 184 loan or pay down any other debt used to build it. And if it's IHB, then it's got to be considered program income. Your biggest risk, will your families actually purchase those housing? The houses, the lower the income, the less required upfront, the higher the risk. The loss of income, lack of incentive to stay. Tenant doesn't meet the required training, maintenance obligations, or perform sweat equity requirements if that's a component, or experience of existing programs. The longer the lease period, the higher the risk. Delinquent rent payments. Remember, if you have 2 or more rent payment delinquencies, it could prevent a lender's willingness to permit the tenant to assume that loan. And the lack of familiarity with mortgage financing. Remember, mortgage payments don't fluctuate like low rent programs. Be sure your families are prepared. And then your political climate could definitely change on your reservation. So some of the sample program descriptions: a recipient created the lease with option to purchase, an LWOP, program to assist tribal members who may not be ready to qualify for the requirements for a mortgage loan from a private lender. Your recipient will own the property and rent to a homebuyer family for a specified rental period, at the end of which the renter has an exclusive option to purchase that property. The description of the program goals to promote affordable rent to own opportunities. Promote affordable rent to own opportunities for those low and moderate income enrolled members who need assistance in qualifying for mortgage financing. Provide opportunities for low and moderate income enrolled members to better access the private mortgage market for home ownership on the recipient's property, and to facilitate self-sufficiency for your tribal members. A sample for the house waiting list preference: all tribal families who have never been assisted, do not own a home, or low or moderate income and meet all the qualifications. All tribal families who do not own a home have been previously assisted but did not achieve home ownership for acceptable reasons, that are low or moderate income to meet all the qualifications, and all tribal families who do not own a home currently assisted by the recipient's home ownership program but have not yet achieved home ownership. So a land sample: only those who are eligible under the laws and customs of the tribe to lease tribally owned land for residential purposes, or who otherwise obtain the specific approval of the tribal executive council, shall be eligible. Non-Indian and non-member spouse may join in the application process, have their income and credit considered. However, non-Indian and non-member spouses may not inherit the land or any improvements to the land therein pursuant to the laws and customs of the tribe. Non-Indian and non-member spouse may not inherit the property in the case of death, or be granted the property by consent of the parties or by the courts in the evidence of a divorce. Applicant qualifications, typical requirements. All applicants have to be able to pay the minimum rent, achieve mortgage readiness according to their client action plan, commit to purchasing the leasehold property, have sufficient income required to meet the minimum rent and other financial obligations of maintaining and buying the home, overcome the obstacles to mortgage readiness, commit to the schedule and time to participate in the required group counseling and one-on-one counseling tailored to the individual's family's needs. A covenant sample. Applicants as well as occupants are required to adhere to the tribal code and all other applicable laws with regard to their personal conduct when it impacts their housing obligations and the rights of others. Participants in this program agree to adhere to the following covenants as long as they reside on the premises as a renter and or subsequently as a homeowner. So you have to have consequences basically for your compliance issues. Findings: the recipient doesn't maintain adequate policies or procedures for financial management, grants management in these areas, tracking matching funds, no bank reconciliation process, procurement policy covered only equipment purchases, not other procurement actions. Your policies have to be developed and implemented for procurement to track your matching funds and your bank reconciliations, requires locating matching fund documentation. If it's insufficient, a proportionate share of your grant funds could result in a disallowed cost loss. The effect of the failure to perform bank reconciliations prevents grantees to detect theft, inaccurate fiscal problems. Recipients have to perform the reconciliations and resolve problems such as uncleared checks, undeposited funds, fraudulent payments, undetected embezzlement, and the consequences of procurements that do not meet federal requirements could be severe. So those are some of the findings and on your policies and procedures, such as ineligible participants, disallowed expenditures, no source documentation, lack of info to determine your TDC, your total development cost, excessive board meetings, you can't be paying them for no reason, project expenditures prior to EA release of funds, inadequate chart of accounts, no labor reports, outdated policies, no recertifications for last 7 years, over reimbursement of staff, invalid procurements, disallowed bonuses, deficient resident files, unsigned leases, backlog of work orders, no waiting list systems, subrecipient does not have written policies and procedures. So your grants management versus your grants evaluation. Your grants management involves planning, executing, and administering your grants and performing your day-to-day operations such as your budgeting, allocating of funds to specific projects, and managing using within your allowable budget, your staffing, providing resources to carry out your functions, your compliance, ensuring all your activities meet the NAHASDA regulations, the federal laws, and the requirements, and then your monitoring, overseeing your project progress and implementation, and then the reporting, which is preparing and submitting required financial and programmatic reports, ensuring transparency. The grants evaluation involves assessing the effectiveness and the impact of programs funded by your NAHASDA funds. It includes measuring your outcomes, determining whether the programs achieve their intended goals, an impact assessment, assessing the long-term effect of the grant on the community or the population that you're serving, your performance metrics, collecting and analyzing data to measure program success and your learning and your improvement, utilizing or using evaluation results to identify strengths, weaknesses, and areas for improvements. So what is the difference between your self-monitoring versus your evaluation? Self-monitoring focuses on what you said you would do and how you said you would do it. Tracks activities to ensure implementation of your plan and meeting compliance requirements. The goal is to ensure compliance with the rules, the regulations, the terms of the grant. Your focus would be the inputs and the outputs. How many units were rehabbed? How much funds were spent? What were the timelines? An evaluation would assess how well those activities were implemented, the effectiveness in achieving your desired outcome. It analyzes the actual quality of the performance and the impact of those activities. The goal is to assess the effectiveness and the impact of that program or project. A focus is to outcome and the impact. Did the rehab of those housing units improve living conditions? Did it reduce homelessness or increase, your overall resident satisfaction? In summary, your self-monitoring ensures that you're doing what you said you were going to do. An evaluation measures how well you did it and whether it had that desired impact. So you need to document everything you do. In conducting performance reviews, your reviewer will rely primarily on information obtained from you as a recipient, including reports, findings from on and off site monitorings, audit reports, information generated from you as the recipient, and disbursement and information systems established by HUD. It has compliance supplements, Part 6 of internal controls, written policies and procedures which exist, establishing communication of your federal award, those requirements to your subrecipients if you have any, the responsibilities for monitoring them, the process and procedures that you utilize for monitoring, the methodology for resolving any types of findings that you should be given, and the requirements related to subrecipient audits, including appropriate adjustment of pass-through accounts. Communicating your policies and procedures, you have to be effective. Your policies and procedures have to be understood and utilized. You should broadcast them, use them as a training tool, discuss them during your orientations, and follow up to ensure that they are being properly implemented. Your final thoughts is to plan, and plan some more, and make sure that you have all of your internal controls put into place. And I'm sorry I ran over 10 minutes, 15 minutes almost. So if you have any questions, let me know. There's my information. Should you utilize it, need it, whatever, I'm there if you ever need anything. And my girl is in the background, and she has got one last request of you. And remember, there's an A&O class next week if you want to take it.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Cheryl. Thank you so much for your time and effort with this presentation. I know that we definitely all learned a lot. As I close out this webinar, please feel free to submit any other questions that you may have for Cheryl. She doesn't mind you sending her any emails. Of course, there's her information.
Okay, for your information about the 2 individual homeowners, I would suggest that you have a meeting with either your board of commissioners or your council. Ask them how they want to address that, and invite them in to speak to your executive director. And perhaps, I don't know if you guys buy home ownership units, but purchase them back and put them back into the program, one of them. But they would be responsible for bringing that unit up to par, you know what I'm saying? Or you would reduce that price. Remember, you're not allowed to pay over a fair market value for anything you purchase, but we used to purchase our homes back. You can usually purchase them for far less than what it would cost you to buy a new one for your program. So that's one way to look at it, my girl. Sorry.
No, you're good. No, you're good. You're good. Give me one moment, Cheryl.
Are you trying to give them their thing?
I'm sorry, what did you say, Cheryl?
Are you trying to give them their evaluation?
Oh, the webinar link? No. I'm actually having trouble changing the slides for some reason. I don't know why, but I am gonna drop the feedback survey in the chat, you guys.
Okay. Yay, I'm glad you're going to come next week, Miranda. That'll be helpful for you.
Letting me.
All right, everyone. So I did add the feedback survey in the chat. I'm having some technical difficulties right now, but please take a moment to complete the survey for today's webinar that I did drop in the chat. It only takes about a minute or so, and your feedback really helps us. Do invite you to be as candid as you like because the survey is anonymous. And we do hope to see you for our next webinar. So just make sure that you sign up for our email list. That way you can get the notifications, and it will inform you when our next webinar is, like date and time, and it'll also tell you who the instructor is. You can also access today's webinar and any other recorded webinars at our new Cathedra webinar archive that's posted to our YouTube channel. So feel free to view them, and you can also share them with your colleagues and your friends. And then you can also check out our upcoming events posted on our social medias. We are on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And we also have an in-house produced podcast titled the Hopathanga Native American Podcast, where we discuss more topics within the Native American housing and self-determination. You can also listen to us on Simplecast, Google Podcasts, Spotify, as well as Apple Podcasts. And you can view this video recording and as well as view the video recordings with our guests on YouTube. So once again, everyone, thank you so much for participating and joining us today. We hope that you have a fantastic rest of your day, and we hope that we can connect with you soon.